Today I will be showing you how to paint this lighthouse on a cliff. To start off for the drawing, I am sketching out some cliffs and some rocks that will be in the water. Here I am sketching out some areas that I want to have some waves. These areas will be left white. To create these waves, the back of these shapes are relatively straight while the front have some more curvy lines. And lastly, I'm sketching out where I want my lighthouse to be. The brush I'm using is my standard number 8 round brush, and I am using a quarter size sheet from a 9x12 sized watercolor paper. If you're doing a bigger size paper, I would recommend using a larger brush. For the sky, I'm starting by getting it wet, then I will use some ultramarine blue and go across the top a few times. Next, I will make a light pink red by mixing my gamboge orange and quinacridone rose, but you can also use any orange and red like alizarin crimson. While the paper is still wet, I'm going to put that red color on the paper overlapping the blue a little bit. Then I will use just my gamboge orange and do a few brush strokes of that near the horizon line. For the ocean, I am using ultramarine blue, and I'm going across that horizon line a few times, and then I'm using a wet brush to blend out the color. I will then do another streak of that blue right under the line of rocks, and once again blend it out with a wet brush. For the water section near the waves, I am mixing some ultramarine blue, neutral tint, and a tiny bit of sap green. Then I'm going to paint that area, making sure to avoid the sections we want to leave white for the waves. If you find that you create a harsh line, just use a damp brush to blend it out. For the area closest to the sand, I am using an old mixture of color on my palette that was phthalo blue and sap green, and I'm just using that to make a lighter color towards the sand. For the sand, I am mixing yellow ochre and quinacridone rust, and I will just paint the sand section, but making sure that I leave that section on the sand white. While that is drying, I will paint a base color on the rocks using some quinacridone rust. I'm also using the same color to paint the base of the cliff. The grass, I'm just using some sap green and going over the parts that I want to have grass. Next, I am creating a darker brown by mixing ultramarine blue and quinacridone rust and going over the base parts of the cliff. I am also using that same dark brown to create the shadows on the rocks in the water. I'm having the light coming from the left, so the shadows will be on the right side of the objects. Now, using the same color I made the sand with, I am painting a thin line right under the white sections on the sand. Then I'm using a damp brush to blend out that color a little bit. Then I'm using the same watercolor to create dark lines under the white waves in the ocean, and also blending it out with a damp brush. Using that same blue, I am doing some small lines right under the rock sections. Next, using the quinacridone rust and a little bit of ultramarine blue, I'm going over the highlight sections of the rocks. If this makes your rocks too dark, just use a damp brush to rub off a little bit of the pigment. I'm using that same brown to go over sections on the cliff as well. Then with a damp brush, I will lift out some of the pigment in some of the sections. To create a little more depth in the grass area, I am mixing some sap green and a little bit of ultramarine blue and going over some of the sections in the grass area. For the lighthouse, I'm mixing gamboge orange and some quinacridone rose. This color will be for the stripes as well as the roof. For the hand railing, I am using neutral tint and lightly drawing out the lines for that. Here I realized I had made my roof too pointy, so I quickly used a paper towel and tapped off some of the pigment, and then I drew out a new roof. The light red from the old roof I blended out with a damp brush into the sky. Next, I create a shadow for the lighthouse by mixing ultramarine blue and neutral tint, and making sure it's watered down. Make sure not to go over this shadow too many times so that the red lines don't smudge. For the left side where the sun is hitting, I am using a damp brush and lightly rubbing on the red parts of the lighthouse. Lastly, to create some depth, I'm using some sap green and painting some grass and bushes on the bottom left and right corners of the painting. Now for my favorite part, taking off the tape and seeing those crisp, clean lines. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to hit that subscribe button for more watercolor tutorials every Friday. Bye!